Um, so we are in John again this morning, finishing up chapter 2. Have you ever wondered if God sees what's happening and just ignores it because it just seems like things aren't getting any better? We probably have all thought this at some point over a situation that we've been in, or even just looking at the world stage and just the things that seem to just go on and on. We've all been wronged by someone, and it seems like they get away with it. We see injustice, and it seems as though the people who are doing the abusing, the exploiting, and even the stealing are benefiting from their corruption while the innocents are suffering. And we can try to take matters into our own hands because we can convince ourselves that if we don't do something, then nothing will be done. So we sometimes want to take matters into our own hands, and we can even try to put a biblical spin on it. We can say, God helps those who help themselves. That is not biblical, by the way. One of those things that we say and think that it's in Scripture, it's not. But what if, while we're busy fretting, complaining, and plotting our own justice, we miss the fact that Jesus is present, that he is sitting quietly and he is braiding a whip in order to fight for us. So if you will stand with me while we read John chapter 2, verses 13 through 25. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle and sheep and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then responded, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this?" And Jesus said to him, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days." And they replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you're going to raise it in 3 days?" But the temple he had spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said. Then they believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken. Now, while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, many people saw the signs he was performing and believed in his name. But Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He did not need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in each person. You can be seated. So this is probably a familiar story to most of us. It's in all 4 of the Gospels. Although the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they include it near the end of Jesus' ministry rather than at the beginning. And John, of course, is not a chronological account of Jesus' life. So there's some scholars that think that Jesus did this temple cleansing twice, while others say no, it was just once, but John put it at the beginning of his public ministry for his own purposes. But John, he has it at the beginning, and he is the only one who mentions a whip in his account of what happened. And I have to admit that as many times as I've read this story, sometimes we are familiar with these stories and we read through them kind of quickly. I've always kind of pictured Jesus making this whip and then using it to hit the people that are selling things in the temple, kind of attacking them Indiana Jones style, which probably says more about my idea of justice than it does God's idea of justice. But what is not in this passage, that's not what this passage tells us. Jesus uses this whip, and then he uses it to drive out the animals. He doesn't even hit the animals. He doesn't actually resort to violence. Maybe he uses the whip to, knock those tables over Indiana Jones style. Don't want to quite get rid of that idea, but then he does something kind of strange. He instructs those selling the doves to take their animals and leave. He doesn't knock over the cages. He doesn't open up those cages and free those animals, and we're going to get to why that might be in a moment. So the problem in this text is that there are people crowding the temple courts with booths for selling sacrificial animals and exchanging money for elevated fees. Michael Card says that normally doves would have gone for about 4 cents a piece, and inside the temple they're going for about 75 cents a piece. which any of us that have ever been in an airport and needed to buy a bottle of water can totally understand that sort of inflation. But what it's doing is it's keeping people from being able to worship God. Eugene Peterson in The Message calls the money changers loan sharks. And they were kind of like those payday check cashing places that charge exorbitant interest rates to people, except that they weren't offering just a loan to get you through to the next payday or, so you can do something fun before you get paid. What they're doing is they're requiring people to go through them to get to God to worship, and they're charging them huge rates. It was a requirement that they change their money, and again, we'll kind of cover that in a minute. So as Jesus sits down to weave this whip together, I think that he is remembering Isaiah 56, 6-7. It says, "And foreigners who bind themselves to the Lord to minister to him, to the love of the name of the Lord and to be his servants. All who keep the Sabbath without desecrating it, and to all who hold fast to my covenant. To these I will bring to my holy mountain and give them joy in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations." So the part of the temple that is crowded with these booths of animals and money changers, and it's just been totally taken over, is the court of the Gentiles. It's the outer courts of the temple, and it is the only place where the non-Jews were allowed to come in to worship. They were taking over the fringe area that effectively kept these foreigners from God. Now, this kind of marketplace was not unusual. People were coming into Jerusalem from all over the world for Passover, and so many of them would need to buy animals for the sacrifice once they got there. They didn't bring their own animals with them, so they would need to buy the animals. But normally, the marketplace would take place far outside the city, not just outside the temple, but outside the city. And the currency, the changing of money, which can sound a little strange, the reason that was required is there was a temple tax that was required. And because the currency of the Roman Empire, which is where all the people coming in from outside of the city of Jerusalem were all under the Roman Empire, those coins had Caesar's image on it. And because it was an image of a man, it wasn't allowed in the temple. So they had to switch out their coins. And these money changers were charging huge rates of exchange. Now, this marketplace, as I said, was usually outside the temple on the Mount of Olives. But it seems at this point, the high priest Ananias decided it was profitable to bring the marketplace inside, probably because he would get a cut of the profits. And we can rest assured that everyone involved in this, except for the people that needed to buy animals or change their money, was making a huge profit. So Jesus walks into this scene, and he doesn't just notice the chaos, the noise of the animals, and the smell. He notices everything that's going on. He takes it all in. He sees the corruption of the temple, the place where people are coming to worship, the corruption of the place that is meant to be the representation on earth of the throne room of the Father. And he sees this corruption, he sees the greed, and he sees the total disregard for the souls who are seeking to worship. And he sits down and he begins to weave a whip. Now, weapons were not allowed in the temple, so Jesus created his own, but he doesn't use it on the people. He doesn't hit anyone with it. He doesn't even use it on the animals. It doesn't say that he beat the animals. He just drove them out of the temple. He removed them from the temple courts and turned over the money changers' tables. And I imagine he may have been tempted when he walked in to address the problem right away. He sees the chaos, he sees the corruption, but instead he stops and he sits quietly and he weaves these cords into a whip, which was probably a way more effective way of clearing out the temple than if he had just shouted, because he would have just added to the chaos that way. Imagine the patience that it took for him to not act right away. But once he is ready, he uses the whip, not for violence, but for justice. Now the doves, they were used as sacrifices for poor people who could not afford a larger animal. Leviticus 5:7 says, anyone who cannot afford a lamb is to bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons to the Lord as a penalty for their sin. one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. Mary and Joseph offered doves for Jesus when they took him to the temple as an infant. Luke 2:22-24 says, when the time came for the purification rites required by the law of Moses, Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons. So Jesus drives out the cattle and the sheep, and he knocks over the money changers' tables, but he just tells the people selling doves to take them out. Now, why does he do this? Why would he not open those cages and just let the birds go free? Well, as usual, scholars have different ideas about why this might have been. Some scholars believe that's because the doves were not easily recaptured, like the sheep and the cattle. They could have gone out and rounded them up pretty easily. The doves would have flown away. Jesus gave the dove merchants a break because of this, is what some scholars think. Some suppose that he was not trying to ruin the livelihood of the merchants, even though they were kind of corrupt. These theories work, but it's also possible that Jesus was not looking out for the merchants, but for the worshipers who were already poor. If the supply of doves that they needed in order to worship God was depleted, the merchants would end up charging more money and making it harder for the poor to obtain what was required for them to worship. Jesus was not seeking revenge. He was not even seeking to punish anyone. He was seeking justice for those who were being exploited by the greed of others. Now, this story can be a little bit of a challenge for us to relate to. We don't require sacrifices to worship, but we can still ask the question, how is it that we might be keeping others from getting to God? How have we had others keep us from getting to God? Because we live in a post-Pentecostal world, we understand that the Holy Spirit is everywhere and lives in every believer, and that really no one can keep us from God. But we still put obstacles in the way of others, keep them from being able to see Jesus clearly. We twist Scripture and we misrepresent God so that people think that they have to live up to certain standards in order to please God, and we call it legalism. When we make up rules and keep raising the bar, we can be just like those that sell in the temple courts. We can just keep people from ever meeting that standard. Keep them frustrated, keep them discouraged, and keep them away from God. When we tie God's approval to us with our success and our health, as the prosperity gospel does, we create a barrier to God by making him out to be a cruel God who punishes with poverty and illness. That does not align with God's character. When we're not transparent with others and tell them that we struggle too with some things sometimes, but we put on a facade of having it all together, we discourage others who think that they'll never be good enough. People can look at their lives and the world around them and begin to wonder, where is God? Why is he not intervening? And if we are not pointing others to Jesus, pointing out all of the ways that he is doing good, we might miss out on what he's doing. After Jesus drove out the animals and turned over the tables and told the dove merchants to get the animals out, he is confronted by the officials of the temples. These are the Sadducees. The Jews responded to him and said, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do this?" They know what they are doing is wrong. They know that they should not be manipulating people in the temple. And they're not asking Jesus to show that his authority is from God at this point. They're asking him which human authority he is aligned with. What human authority has told you that this is okay? Now, they probably believe that he's aligned with the Pharisees or maybe even the Zealots, because he's not one of them. So they ask for proof of his authority, and they don't believe that he has any, because they all think that they're the ones that have authority over the temple. So they're trying to trap him. Jesus responds rather cryptically and shockingly. He answered them, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days." He's telling them he's going to give them a sign, all right. It's going to take a while, but he's going to give them a sign. With the benefit of hindsight, we know, and the Apostle John who wrote this knows, that Jesus is talking about his body as the temple. The Sadducees don't know this, they don't understand this, and they are outraged. Michael Card helps us understand the shocking nature of Jesus' answer to those first century Jews. This is our first major example of the motif of misunderstanding, one of the distinctive motifs in John's gospel. Destroy this sanctuary, Jesus says, and in 3 days I will raise it. It would be difficult to underestimate the attachment the Jews had to the temple. They called it ha-makom, the place. In this place they met with God. In this place they offered sacrifices for their sins. In this place their entire culture was secured. When the temple was later destroyed, razed to the ground, with not one stone left standing on another, the character of Judaism radically changed. As almost always happens in religion, what was initially intended to be reverence for God degenerated into a love affair with a building. Jesus' scandalous words, destroy this sanctuary and in 3 days I will raise it, would stay lodged in the Pharisees' minds for years. Those words would be the basis for charges against him 2 years later. And years after that, his disciples, specifically Stephen, would be persecuted and martyred for following the one who spoke against the temple. Their behavior in allowing the merchants to take over the temple is destroying the very temple that they claim to revere. They aren't taking it down brick by brick, but they're destroying its purpose, its sacredness. And Jesus is stepping in to bring justice to those who are marginalized because of their behavior. Jesus tells them of the ultimate sign he will provide. They will destroy the temple of his body, and in 3 days he will rise again. But they still won't believe. I doubt that even if the physical temple had been destroyed and Jesus built it back in 3 days, they wouldn't have believed either. They are determined to disbelieve Jesus. Jesus was fighting for everyone when he cleansed the temple that day, and he still fights for us today. We don't always see it. We can so easily get distracted by our circumstances and our pain that we always see is the injustice of it all. We are impatient and we are easily overwhelmed. This is not new, and we are not unique in our impatience and our inability to see how God is working in ways we cannot see. It's very easy for us to turn on the news, and of course we get it constantly fed to us, and just feel overwhelmed. I heard a new term the other day, and I thought this fits so well. We've heard of compassion fatigue, where you're pouring out yourself all of the time and you just get really tired. You get fatigued because you're trying to fix all of the things that are wrong in the world. Well, there's also something called outrage fatigue, where we're so busy being outraged at all the things going on, and some of the things really matter and we should be outraged by them. But then we get fatigued and we just kind of shut down and we can't be outraged anymore, which means we can't show compassion anymore. I find that to be the case when I pay too much attention to the news. Can't bury our head in the sand, but we also need to keep our eyes on Jesus and not just on what's happening in our world. The prophet Elijah is another amazing example, not just of faith, but of how we as humans can become so incredibly discouraged, and it seems like it happens really easily. Elijah performed many miracles during his life, and he knew without a doubt that God was real and God was powerful. If we read 1 Kings 18, we can see how he had participated in some amazing miracles on Mount Carmel. And then he outruns the king's chariot, gets back to the palace, and is confronted by threats from the evil queen Jezebel. And his reaction to that, even on the heels of an incredible mountaintop experience, was to give up. 1 Kings 19, verses 3 through 9, it says, Elijah was afraid and he ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. And he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, Get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals, and a jar of water. He ate and drank, and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and he ate and he drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave to spend the night. For 40 days and 40 nights he waited while he traveled. And then when God reveals himself in a still small voice, Elijah is told that God has never left him and that he is not, in fact, alone. Then a voice said to him, "Elijah, what are you doing here?" And he replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put prophets to death with their sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." The Lord said to him, "Go back the way you came, and go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael, king over Aram, also Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel. Anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel Meholah, to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any escaped from the sword from Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escaped from the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal and whose mouths have not kissed him." God didn't punish Elijah for his discouragement and his lack of faith, but revealed that he had been working on Elijah's behalf all along. We don't always see how God is working on our behalf, and we don't always see the great cloud of witnesses around us, but we can be assured that he is working and that we are not alone. He is the God of justice. He loves us, and he has never left us alone. Jesus tells a parable in Luke 18:3-8 about a persistent widow who is denied justice by an unjust judge until she perseveres. He tells this parable to illustrate the justice of God. He says, "There was a widow in a small town who kept coming to him with a plea, 'Grant me justice against my adversary.' For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, 'Even though I don't fear God or care what people think, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see she gets justice so that she won't eventually come and attack me.' And the Lord said, 'Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find any on the earth?'" It's easy for us to get discouraged. We can begin to think that Jesus is too slow in providing justice for us. But what if we're missing what he's doing? What if, while we think he's not acting quickly enough, he is quietly sitting off to the side, braiding cords into a whip that he will use for our benefit? He is the God who sees. He is not forgotten. He is not unconcerned. He sees, he cares, and he will act in his time. I'm going to close with reading from Psalm 37, 5-11, and then 27-34. "Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret, it only leads to evil. For those who are evil will be destroyed, and those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. A little while, and the wicked will be no more. Though you look for them, they will not be found. But the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity. Turn from evil and do good. Then you will dwell in the land forever. For the Lord loves the just and will not forsake his faithful ones. Wrongdoers will be completely destroyed. The offspring of the wicked will perish. The righteous will inherit the land and dwell in it forever. The mouths of the righteous utter wisdom, and their tongues will speak what is just. The law of their God is in their hearts, and their feet do not slip. The wicked will lie in wait for the righteous, intent on putting them to death, but the Lord will not leave them